Hi, welcome. Nice to see you again, this time for our August monthly. So good to see so many people. I hope you had time to enjoy a bit of holidays, or if not, you will go soon. I'm going soon, so I'm really excited. So we have the topic of the day is basically the presentation that Shona Benton has been working on for her paper to become a fellow, SIP fellow. And I know she's put a lot of effort, and the findings are also very, very interesting. So we dedicate a lot of the time of today on that. And then we'll have time for Q&A, discussions, and brainstorming around the topics that she covered. So on the Institute update, briefly, we're thinking about creating something a bit more exclusive for the SIP community, and then the ones that certify, and we're brainstorming. Robin and I were thinking of how can we build something that brings even more value to the community. So that's one. There's a special promotion on the SIP course and the certification in case you have anyone who wants to learn and become a SIP certified. So that's it for that. Then Robin and I have launched a new survey. It's called the Strategy Implementation Survey. You can go directly. If you take this QR code, you can go out and fill it in. It's important for us, and you will be the first one to know what's coming on and the outcome. What I think is I will put the link of the survey in the chat. So while you're, you have that too. Here it is. So either with the QR or with the link, appreciate if you can fill it in, and it's a quick one. But we really want to see what are the trends, what are the changes from the last survey that we did 2 years ago. And now to the presentation of Shona. So Shona, yeah, I know how much work she's done on the paper, but also the amount of experience she has on very large transformation, very large programs. So I was very interested when she said she wanted to become a SIP fellow and do the research and do the write this paper, and the angle I think was very interesting as well from the public sector, right? So I always we think that the public sector is slow and hierarchical, and but they have also some good stuff as well. So what can we learn from that? What can the public sector do better? So we've asked Shona if she could present her work. She has developed a nice presentation. So let's hear from Shona, and then we'll have a bit of breakouts to discuss what she presented and see what we can, what are the insights that we can learn from that. So Shona, I've given you, you should have already, yeah, that. Just make sure that everybody's on mute.
You come over there. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see you. Thank you, Shona.
Excellent. Right, let's see how this goes. I was interested in the public sector aspects of strategy implementation because I'm currently in the public sector, although I have done strategy implementations across private as well, and not just in the UK where I am now, across international as well. But when I took the original SIP qualification and did the learning, there were some aspects I thought didn't apply to my organization, in particular, making a profit and so on. So I thought it would be interesting to explore. And then I found out that actually the failure rate in public sector is even lower than in the private sector for strategy implementations. So clearly that was an issue, and it's worth exploring what that means. So I've looked at a typical public sector organization. I've worked in a number. That my current one is a live project and rather sensitive with intense media interest here in the UK. And so I didn't want to be specific about its issues. And it's very specific as well, because it will end, unlike many public sector organizations. So I've generalized it. It's general public sector. I'm hoping that aspects of it will be of interest to those not in the public sector as well. And the tools and techniques and approaches are very practical. I hope that people can pick up from that. There are a few components of other methodologies that I've learned in my life, the OGC ones, Prince 2, management of portfolios and so on, but I don't emphasize that here. They just might be recognizable to some others. So let's skip through this and see if you find anything interesting here. So I'm going to start off with the characteristic of a public sector organization. Now, I think we all know what they are, but I thought it was a good basis to start the paper on. And then why would we improve strategy implementations? Again, hopefully talking to a crowd that doesn't need to be won over here, but just again, worth documenting for the purpose of the paper. And then into how can we make some changes. Many of the tools and techniques and approaches are from what we've implemented here in this organization. But as I say, it's from a lifetime career of strategy implementations and not specific to my organization. And I've redacted some sensitive data where necessary. You will recognize 7 out of these bullet points are the components of the strategy implementation roadmap. So we've looked at those with a couple of others as well. And then there's a little short bibliography of some of the facts and figures in here. I've put references in with, and the sources are referenced in the last slide, but in the paper there's a fuller set of sources and a full bibliography there, which you'll get access to later. So characteristics of the public sector, no surprise to anyone, it is controlled and funded in the main by the state. Many have a few little bits of funding generation activities, but in the main they come from the state. They have public accountability, a high level of scrutiny, and good governance is essential. And that's quite a fundamental aspect of the public sector that can't be ignored. Often short-term political horizons with an electoral turnaround time of 4 to 5 years. Many are looking towards the next election, and so it's quite difficult to get very long-term funding. I know strategies, we try to say we do it within that time period these days, but it's still difficult if an election is coming, and I'm certainly feeling that here in the UK with a sort of rumoured election next spring. Lack of leadership skills in strategy implementation, not unusual. We've covered this in this course across a number of organization types, but again, worth mentioning here to try and how do we deal with that. The funding public sector organizations don't have competition generally. They're generally designed to fill a niche that they need, whether it's a local council or a funding body. They sit quite squarely in their area and are often sort of service orientated. They don't manufacture things and they don't produce things. Project prioritization, yes, the business cases tend to be big in the business cases, and it tend to be big in the public sector in my experience, but often when it comes to the hard crunch of project prioritization, what can we do? It ends up being cost. What can we do this financial year? And this financial year's funding is absolutely key. And you're challenged. It's my daily job is to challenge saying, but I've got a business case. This does deliver value. Yes, I know, but we don't have the funds this year. It's a peculiar challenge to the public sector. Staff tend to be committed. They tend to stay. They have a public service motivation in general, but they tend to be rule followers. And there's a sort of fear of making an error. There's a general risk aversion culture to the policy. And so, in public sector, in the McKinsey 2x2 matrix that we're familiar with in SIP, most public sector organizations still would fit in this bureaucracy corner down here, I think. So in the public sector, an astonishing 80% project failure rate, according to research, which is higher even than different research shows in the commercial sector. So that is a huge, huge project failure rate. And in the UK, according to the Office of National Statistics, the UK public sector spends £20 billion per year on transformation and projects. And so, that if you extrapolate that figure, that becomes £16 billion sort of wasted in trying to implement strategies. So what would be the benefits? Obviously, you get some financial benefits from savings, cost savings generally, not making a profit. There's also intangible benefits, such as reducing risk, huge amount of risk in some of the old ways of working in the public sector, and consumer expectations. Whoever their customer is, or maybe a reluctant customer, it may be just their local residents, they have high expectations now. We all expect a one-stop shop. We all expect apps. We all expect things to happen with a couple of clicks. And that is not happening in a number of public sectors, organizations. So examples of best practice, Robin and Antonia were delighted to see this first thing come up. Of course, the strategy implementation roadmap is a great framework and toolkit that we're familiar with here, and it's good model to hang the hat on. Something I did in the early 2000s, I was working for this organisation, Sport Scotland, which is a grant funding organisation to funding to sports bodies within Scotland, and we'd recently created a national lottery. So there were two arms to the organisation, different cultures, different processes, and governing bodies of sport, swimming, athletics, and so on, had to apply for different grant funding streams individually with all the package of documents they had to apply for, constitution, management accounts, annual accounts, and so on, every time they wanted to apply for a grant. And I started with looking at data, integrating data and integrating processes, and ended up designing what this is on their website today, which is a one-stop shop for funding bodies of sport. They have a highly skilled partnership manager, and they apply for all their funding once, whether it's lottery or exchequer, and they get and it's only one set of documents that are shown, and it's developed on a partner relationship basis. More recently, Singapore has developed this concept of the smart nation. They're actually going further than Scotland, because obviously they've heard about Scotland, that they are doing this in one-stop shop grant funding across all their public sector grant funding organizations. And so everyone just needs to apply once, and that's in amongst the strategy of full digitization and full citizen ID across Singapore. And the UAE similarly is doing integrated digitization. They are public sector, examples of public sector organization, but of course they have longer term political horizons than many democracies with higher turnover of parties and governments and so on. But nevertheless, some good lessons learned there for us all to consider. So going into the business model part of the strategy implementation framework, as it says, we should consider our external and internal environments. As I said, the public sector organizations tend not to have external competitors and can have some influence on customers or communities, but not much. But obviously that should be considered. Can we attract new people to the community? Are there future customers? But in the internal environment, a lot of emphasis is on digitization, and that's important. But the core of it is integrating data, I think. But we've actually made this a standard now within our projects and our transformation, that we don't just produce a tool or do a process flow. We do the whole business architecture. Sometimes it's called operating model. Look across the whole operating model and make sure that it all works together, including structured data, which is whatever database we're going to have, and the unstructured data with documents. Our organization has a huge number of customer documents that are submitted, and we have to design where they are stored and how they're stored in an integrated manner with the structured data. And governance, it's not just we can't just design a process. We have to design where the decisions taken, how far down the organization can decisions be taken, or what are the levels. We call it a delegations ladder. What are the levels of decision making? And that all has to be designed in. So also part of the business model, a number of public sector organizations, and definitely think of my local council, design a service with, if that's its business architecture there, they design the service, we're going to do this new thing, and they design the process and the data and stuff all separately. And a bit like the original Sport Scotland idea is that the customer has to then find that service and apply to it. I gave the example to Robin and Antonio that I recently been eligible for a free bus pass here in Glasgow in Scotland. And oh my goodness, I've given up even looking at it. I had to go through two different pages of the website, then to a third website that external to the council. And then they asked me to submit 3 different forms of ID, which was passport, utility bill, and a photo or something like that. And I thought, me, I pay my council tax and I have a parking permit. So this is a challenge. And I, as I say, if customers are getting frustrated with services, it doesn't work that well. So an idea for a public sector organization is to consider a business model where the data is integrated, the services and the processes sit on that, and customers can access everything they might want to once. And it does need integrated data, and it needs high quality process design as well. And then, of course, as you know, these days we all expect apps, and we all expect customer portals, to get access to the data. But that does need the data to be absolutely accurate, because there's no human interface going, oh, I don't think that looks quite right, before they respond to a query or anything. It goes out more or less raw. So it has to be quality assured, and it has to be really good data. So I've ended up doing strategy implementations that I call it data-centered, customer-focused, and those two things seem to work together really well and seem to fit well, and helps the service provision of the organization. So on to leadership excellence. This is similar across all organizations, and some of this is straight strategy implementation theory. We know the leadership needs to champion it. We know it needs to cascade through the line managers, because there's no point going to a town hall where the chief executive's going on about something, and then they go back to their desks and the line managers rubbishing it. This example strategy here, this is exactly our transformation strategy. Robin was pretty aghast that we still need to say these things, but that is where we're at. My organization particularly is, although it's public sector, is basically a startup. It started in 2017, so maybe we're worse than most, but that's the example that I've thought would be good for any public sector organization. The leadership should consider the performance of the organization and the organizational health. That's the sort of adherence to values, adherence to the new strategy, and these two things will go together. Recruitment and retention of good leaders are very important. In the civil service in the UK, a number of people move around different departments and different NGOs, and they can bring quite a sort of bureaucratic culture with them. So it's once you get, or if you train a good one, it's quite important to try and get them to stay, and you'll have to start again with retraining a new member or a new leader that comes in. And then Robin challenged me to look a little bit more about how we could develop this organization. And so we haven't done this here. We still have core values that are quite turgid, if you like. We have good ones. They are respect and integrity and safety, because we've got some construction in our organization, and leadership. So good sounding core values, but not towards the agile or towards the dynamism that you quite like. So I thought it would be quite interesting to explore, and I don't have control over our values because they come from bigger organization, but it'd be quite interesting for someone to explore more dynamic or agile type values within an organization, to see if that helps the change and the strategy implementation. And these are cheap or free almost sort of techniques that public sector organizations can use that don't cost a lot of money and are worth doing. And then we have resource challenges. We don't have a huge number of project managers or change managers or so on, or even process mapping and data people. So what we've created are communities of practice within our organization, where people who are doing a similar role but have a day job, if you like, could develop their skills and could perhaps take on projects as capacity allows. And this is working well for us. We do sort of regular training sessions. We're still developing our methodology, and it would, I feel there's a legacy element to this. I feel we are leaving a lot more people with some really good core skills than we would have otherwise. So also in leadership excellence, as I said at the beginning, public sector needs excellent governance. The only thing that existed when I started with this was a senior management team, and they weren't doing what you would think a senior management team was doing. So I've actually changed this dramatically, introduced this and introduced these. So just let me explain this. So this is run the business. This is business as usual operations. We've got intense workload happening, and that's a very important part of the business. And we've expanded their responsibilities to include what I think a senior management team should do, which is strategic risk management and so on. The decisions on capital spend are unique to my organization, and that was happening. We introduced an operations management group. This has nothing to do with transformation. This was just an example. This was an introduction to try and get the next level of management into thinking outside their technical lead roles and to start taking decisions across the whole division. So operational decisions, staff welfare, and so on across the whole division. So that's run the business. But then for the transformation, we introduced these two groups here. The same people. So if horizontally, these are the same people, they just come to a different meeting with a different secretariat and different responsibilities. This is the transformation board. Sometimes people call it investment committee. There's other names where they take investment decisions, prioritize and so on projects. And then this same group, the next level of management, come to what we call the transformation impact group. And I'm going to talk about this a couple of times through the presentation. This is about making sure that the impact of transformation activities and perhaps IT projects where we might need them to help us with requirements or user testing and so on is not too much for their intense daily workload. And that gives them a huge input and buy-in to the strategy implementation. And I'll talk about how these two can interact. So that set up good governance. But our division was moved into another division, and the new chief was very interested in regular reporting and all that. And she has now completely calmed down. She's completely confident in our good governance, and we do not now have to report on this quite as regularly as we used to. And she's very confident in the governance that we have and the existing reporting that we have. So that sounds like a good tick in the box. The other thing that I felt with leadership, and I think this is true across the private sector as well, is that senior leaders are normally, forgive me, those who are here, it can be quite difficult to get them to do some training because I don't know if it's loss of face or loss of dignity or something, but it can be quite challenging. And, they feel they've got there on their merit and they are fully formed. But we felt that doing the training on the transformation board roles, so we called it role-based training, and if they were project sponsors of projects, we called it role-based training, that it allowed us to teach them more about strategy implementation, more about the other stuff, the culture stuff, the soft stuff, as well as calling it role-based training, so that they did become more expert and more bought into the strategy implementation, and they completely own it. It's not, I've done strategy implementation in the past where it's Shona sitting in the corner sort of thing. This is not this. This is, with this governance in place and the way we've approached it, this is not that. They definitely own it, and it's quite exciting to be part of that, I can tell you. So value creation, as I say, in the public sector, we don't really talk about profits. It's all about cost savings. For those that are not familiar with it, this is a spreadsheet, the finance spreadsheet. I know it's in Oracle, it is, but it's the spreadsheet version that I see. This is an annual, redacted with lots of rubbish in the left-hand column, but this is sort of an annual cost budget that we have to stick to. And we're now in August, and I still haven't got this financial year's agreed because of the fiscal constraints that we now have in the UK. So it's very, very challenging. And as I say, even with business cases, they will want you to stick to whatever numbers you have. So we do have business cases. We look at the financial, all the ROIs and the total cost across the total cost of ownership of the product and so on. We look at that. We also include intangibles, and I'll talk about that a bit later too, intangible benefits and risks and so on. Those are important to make the case. And it's something that I think, even in my organization, which is large in the UK scheme of things, missed in its business case, looking at the widest possible business community benefits. It's all too common to look at, if we do this, it saves it, you know, this helps save this money because we're reducing this workforce or whatever. But it's important to look at how wide do these benefits go for this digitization or this strategy implementation, and incorporate all of those into the business cases. The challenge with the annual funding constraints can be overcome by influencing and saying this is a long-term infrastructure strategy implementation, and it should be considered part of the spending review, which is typically over a 3 to 5 year cycle. And so you can get something in and committed to over the 3 to 5 years, which is necessary for a larger strategy implementation. And then if it's a very political organizational party, if it's very close to government or the council, it's important to get cross-party support, because if there's a risk that at the next election the party will change and your organization will be curtailed, or the strategy will be cut, then that's a big challenge. So there's some ideas there. Value creation, doing the right things at the right time. In order to implement the strategy, you will have projects. There'll be multiple projects to implement the strategy. So we're moving into project management here. Projects will have logical dependencies. We had a data issue where teams were using different data. So we had an initial project called Golden Thread that was to try and pull the data components together, and that had to be done first. So whenever you look at your projects, look at the logical dependencies first, and then obviously to get an idea of what the project is and the scope of it and so on. Something like Antonio's project canvas with individual business cases is important. And then we did this little thing of prioritization. We mapped strategic alignment to deliverability. These were taken from the data in the business cases. The size of the circles here are cost. I know you can't read it, but it's just to give you an indication. The size of the circles linked to cost. It could be value. We just chose cost because of the aforementioned. And the hatched ones are legislative or mandatory by the minister projects to show that they had to be done. And so when we get a new project in, we map it on here and we show where it is relative to the others. And if we had to decide, for investment decisions, we find this useful if we're curtailed or we have to deprioritize something. So project management, we did a maturity assessment of our portfolio and project management. So everything from governance, risk and issue management, all the way around to some portfolio measures here. These 14 measures are from the OGC framework called P3M3, which is the maturity methodology. Maturity, anyway, there's 3 words: management, maturity, and methodology. Rearrange those to make something fit. So that's a standard assessment there. And then I added in change management because we were doing that in some part, and normally it is separate from project management. I just wanted that included. So the original assessment was pretty poor, which is what we expected. We were down around the 0s and 1s. That's the blue one there. We set a target of sort of 2s and 3s. We weren't too ambitious. We didn't feel it was a value for money case to go up to level 5. And then by November of last year, we had exceeded in most cases. And these interviews and questionnaires went out to our internal customers, if you like, our business users. And they weren't particularly, you know, you might argue they weren't particularly knowledgeable in our standards. It wasn't our internal people who were expert in our standards. So we were pleased to know that they get it and they were on board and they understood what we were trying to do. And we've set some more targets now, but not too ambitious. We're just trying to improve benefits and finance cost management at the moment. And then in terms of dashboard reporting, we sort of had this little funnel diagram that my colleague Michelle developed, and we have projects waiting in the pipeline. They then do, our project canvas is called a PID, and we've got a short version of the PID to get them initiated, and then we've got the longer version of the PID in the business case, and then they become live projects through to a closure report. And this becomes part of our monthly report, and we're just exploring whether to rag them or what else we can do with this diagram. But people get very familiar of what projects we've got on and how we're where we are with them. And then doing the right things. This is just another example of, this is the intangibles part of the business case. So if you can't make a financial business case for something, which you may not be able to, the intangibles can swing it. And this was something I've been developing over many years, and we really use it in anger, if you like, here, and it's working very, very well. That you may have options for your project. This is the current system, that if you didn't do anything, you may have one or you may have more options within your project of how digitized you are going to go or what you're going to do. Whether you're going to procure or build in-house or whatever the traditional sort of options there. And you score these just like a risk. So you score these as what's the likelihood of achieving that outcome, and what's the impact if you did. And the score for the risks, which are negative, they become negative, and any intangible benefits are positive. The caveat is you have to be careful not to double count. You can't have both. They're not absolute scores. They're just relative. They're just relative across the options, and it's, you could say, partly subjective, but it works out that when you add all those up, usually it's quite clear which is the preferred option, and that the do nothing usually is a high risk option and shouldn't be done. So it's an interesting contribution, I think, to feasibility studies or business cases, options evaluations. And then project management at the right time. For us, this means making sure that our teams are not overtaxed. The teams are horizontal, again, sort of some redacted nonsense data there, and the projects are vertical. We have some automations as well, which sort of a separate work stream. And the project managers own this column, and they indicate which teams will have some impact over the next 3 months. According to this, how many resource hours they estimate the team will be needed. And then at the impact group that I talked about, the operational managers that meet once a month, the impact group, they look at this and they consider it for their team. Now, this was ragged at one point, but we changed it to intensities of blue, because the red didn't necessarily mean bad, because sometimes you need high intensity workload on strategy implementation in order to get the goodies at the end, if you like. So we changed it to intensities of blue. But despite there being 3 highs on this diagram, none of these teams are ones I would be particularly concerned about. It would be this one here with 3 lows and a medium in the next 3 months that might, the operational managers might say that's a little too much. And they have once actually squealed, if you like, and said that's too much. They escalated it to the transformation board, who looked at these 4 projects and made a decision to slow down 2 of them. And it worked very well, and the teams felt they'd been listened to, and we had taken action when they said it was too much. So into culture evolution, according to this research here, which is in the bibliography at the back, 82% of public sectors organizations have below average organizational health. So challenges in the culture and the coordination sort of capabilities of staff. They are service providers in the main, so it's important to consider that. There's a whole topic of another paper in service provision. And then reinforcing new core values. So this list here actually a lot of it came from our organization, and we do values very well. I was very surprised, but the first time I heard sort of tough construction guys talking about mental health in a meeting, I thought, oh, this is different. Our values, although they're sort of traditional of respect and integrity and safety includes mental health and well-being. And so they are taken seriously. We have values moments at the beginning of meetings. We have values champions. values awards and rewards for award winners, just a very cheap pin on your lanyard. It doesn't cost very much. And we do talk, I have failed someone's probation, and I've used the words, the behaviors did not meet our values, and people do use that actively when necessary. Succession planning, talent identification, performance assessment related to values, and they're quite powerful tools to embed the culture that you're trying to achieve. And obviously looking around, leadership have a role to play in this as well, ensuring the cultures are embedded. Employee engagement, we have a change manager. I would encourage anyone doing a strategy implementation. We have 2.5 is a bit rude, but we have 2 change managers and an assistant actually, and they help embed the changes within the teams. So they really, their job is to ensure and improve the organizational health. So they're there, typical of, we've talked about in the strategy implementation roadmap, stopping things that need to be stopped, pushing up the change, encouraging change to happen. They would be there. We haven't done this, as I said, but they would be there to help move the core values to the new one. They own this team impact matrix that I talked about before. They own this, and they're the coordination of it between the operational leads and the project managers, and they provide the escalation. And then generally, they're there to inspire, maintain the message, and listen. A lot of, there can be apathy in public sector. Many, I can see, and there's research that shows that people can stay in the public sector because the salaries maybe not as great as private sector, the pensions and the job security and so on is very good, but that doesn't mean they're going to be jumping up and down to engage and get on board with change. And then stakeholder management, in the main, as the basics is a comms plan. We all need that, and that's true of every implementation. I love the 7x7 thing in the strategy implementation roadmap. Say the same message in 7 different ways using 7 different media. That's definitely something to consider. But tailor the contents to the stakeholders. Why this? For employees, you need to overcome the apathy. Why this strategy? How the individuals themselves, so we tailor the messages to the individual teams and individuals, how they will benefit from it. Make sure the new culture is there, that people can speak out if they see something not quite working, and what should they do differently. This is standard stuff from strategy implementation roadbook, so you all know this pretty well. For funding department stakeholders, important to talk about the numbers, the money or the metrics is important. And then for employees and customer stakeholders, keep it lively with pictures, stories of the vision, and telling stories of what's going well. And we try and do that with video and whole meeting updates, as well as the old-fashioned sort of newsletter. We try and do it a number of different ways, and we try and get the customers. They're not really customers. They're our team members, but our eventual recipients of some of the digitization changes to talk about the messaging themselves. And then tracking performance. The traditional way in the public sector would be, are we getting OPEX savings, and have a baseline and have a target from the business case, and it would feed into the monthly financial reporting cycle. But I do like the balanced scorecard. So I know there'll be people here pleased to see that. And these are some examples that I've put in here that we have done some of them, not all of them, I'll be honest. But these are some ideas that I thought, and we need to do better in this area across the balanced scorecard, of making it monthly reporting cycle and including a whole lot of metrics, particularly around organizational health. I think we should do better with, and integration of processes, and how do we measure good governance. It feels good, but how do we measure it? So that is it. Any questions? I'm afraid I have a hard stop at 3. I'm running for a train. Please email it at any time. We've got a few minutes for questions, and then if you get this presentation, there's the bibliography at the end as well.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Fiona, thank you. Really, really good. I really like it. Second time I see it, and I get more from it. So so let's get back to I wanted to do breakouts, but we have already not so much time, so it will be super small. So I prefer to have an open discussion. Any thoughts, please raise your hands. I'm going to check any questions for Shona. Let me see if there's any questions, any comments, anything to build up.
I have a question. It's Wayne here from
Wayne,
Canada.
yeah.
Jonah, congratulations. I've been in the public sector on the IT and the implementation for 20 plus years, working with provincial governments, state governments, and local governments. And I feel for you. It is a very, very difficult process to manage. It's like herding the cats, managing the hierarchy, and we call the X factor, where what happens above the line, which is going to impact the outer citizen audience, and then what happens below the X, which is really what happens internally, and how do you manage that? My question is, were you able to, or are you able in the process to manage the interactions and the state of where you are in the maturity on a real-time basis? Or is this something where you're dealing with a lot of spreadsheets that are Excel and you have to accumulate the data? I'm curious to know the lag time, because I think there's a little bit of latency that may be impacting the ability to deliver a better outcome.
Yes. So do you mean in terms of the tools to support strategy implementation, or do you mean tools within the business?
I think overall implementation of the project as an architecture, and that you're able to deliver it in a real relevant time where you know all of the stakeholders and the custodians and the stewardship of it in real time, which is a big challenge. There is an answer. I'm just curious to know how you go approach it.
Yeah, my organization is not a typical public sector. It as I say, it basically started in 2017, and I've just done the forecast now. We will be largely finished by 2044. So we have an issue around what is worth doing, what is worth digitizing, which a long-term public sector organization wouldn't have that issue. You know, they're there forever. So, and our delivery work is in 3 phases, and we're halfway through the second phase, and we've only got 1 more to go. And so our transformation, there will not be much of a business case to do much more transformation beyond the end of 2024. That's when we expect to have finished. So our business case to systemize our strategy implementation is not really there. This organization will just not have that. So a lot of our stuff is on quite complex spreadsheets. Yeah. And it's done on monthly checkpoint reports and monthly meetings.
That's a big challenge for you.
Yes.
Thank you for the answer. And Tony, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Wayne. There's 4 questions on the chat, so we'll go by order. Christina Hasselman, please share your question or comment or feedback.
So good morning. My name is Christina, and I'm joining from Fiji in the Pacific. So I work for an organization called the Pacific Community SPC. It's a regional organization, so it's an intergovernmental member-owned organization. So it's like working because we have 22 Pacific Island member states. It's like working for 22 public sectors at once.
Okay.
Within our organization, we've recently just launched our brand new 10-year strategic plan, and what's a relatively new feature is the values. And I noticed that you said you had used values as a measure to sort of create culture and behavior within the organization. And that's something we're kind of struggling with at the moment, in that, how do we enforce accountability for culture? And we're sort of, at the beginning, it was hot and it was, everyone was tuning in and using it as a way to connect. But what I wanted to ask is, can we still use it as a way to build a shared culture in the organization, when we're doing, like, when people are here on 3-year contracts? Is that something that's feasible, or do you have suggestions about something that we could do?
Well, actually I do, because that list there came from a short paper. It's less than a page, I think, but it still had more detail than that, because I'm on the board of a national volunteer, I'm on the board of Volunteer Scotland, which is a national body of volunteering in Scotland, and they had just introduced some new values. And so I just thought through all the approaches so I could send that to you. Very happy to do that if you happy to message me.
Yes, please.
I cannot tell you how incredible it is in this organization that this works, and to the extent, I mean, it is a construction project, and so they do emphasize safety. They I know lots of people talk about safety, but the seriousness it's taken through the values, and I mean, I told Robin and Antonio, I've just won a values award for safety because I talked at a conference about mental health and well-being in the office, in the stress that our teams work with, in amongst senior leaders from construction who were talking about physical safety. And we had just had our first and hopefully only fatality the month previously. So I had to go and say, mental health and well-being is serious within our teams. Research shows that it is, and our own research shows that it is, and try to obviously, it was, the fatality, it was terrible, absolutely terrible. But stress is terrible too, and stress and mental health causes, serious illness as well. And so I went and I did it, and at the end of it, I thought, well, thank goodness I didn't do a Jennifer Lawrence, I didn't trip up the stairs and so on. But actually, someone nominated me for a Values Award, saying the impact of that on the 1,000 people we have working in offices was huge. And so it can, and it made me feel good. Obviously, you're nominated for an award and you win an award, that's great. But actually, it made me realize, oh, there was an impact to what I said. It's not just getting up there and speaking. So, and people win awards for leadership and integrity and respect, and are nominated. And we emphasize if people have been nominated, and people feel good about nominating, and people feel good about doing it. And these are awards for doing stuff beyond your job, doing something that wouldn't be part of just doing a good job. And it's the first only organization I've been in that actually does live and breathe their values, and it works very well.
Thank you. We have still 3 questions, 9 minutes to go, so we need to go a bit quicker.
I'll be shorter. Okay.
Kietza, did I spell your name? Did you pronounce well, Kietza?
Yes, you did. You did. Thank you,
Thank
Antonio.
you.
Thank you, Shauna, for the really great presentation. My name is Chiedza Jones. I'm in Canada and have worked for several years with the not-for-profit sector. So no experience in the public sector, but really still appreciated, I think, what you shared around particularly templates just in response to the high rate of poor strategy implementation, and the way that you've been able to put forward those useful templates, process improvement, best practices in order to improve strategy implementation. My question is just around, again, when we look at values, just around, and culture as well, is building that culture of accountability. Because often I think as much as you may have the right processes in place, as much as you may have the right, templates to help to support implementation, where there may not really be that culture of accountability, a lot of that may really fall flat. And I'm curious to know, I think particularly particularly around the public sector, recognizing that you have elected officials that at the end of the day are held accountable, perhaps via, the way of elections and whatnot. What that has looked like, particularly in your experience, in terms of really trying to push that change around accountability when particular metrics are not met, and how you approach that, I think, combined with change management as well.
Managing elected representatives is a whole art in its own right, and a member of my team does that very well. I don't really have to, as a Scot, don't put me in front of an elected representative is probably what I'd say. I'm not too politically, I tend to be too direct for the political savviness, but what I would say is proactive communication and keeping them on board, and roles and responsibilities. A lot of business issues come down to, people say somebody wasn't communicated with. It's who was responsible for the communication and why didn't it happen. So I think making sure that the governance is clear and who or what body is making that decision, and proactive two-way communication with the elected representatives. We have regular meetings with the department that's responsible for our minister, and we have a commissioner as well that looks into our approach from our customer side, and we're always going above and beyond proactively to keep them on side beforehand. We do briefings and everything up front before they go anywhere where they might hear some other conflicting information from another MP, for example, or something like that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Yetza. Claudette and then Evelina. Thank you, Claudette.
Yes, good morning. Claudette Fleming from Bermuda, also in the nonprofit sector. I want to congratulate you, Shona, on an excellent presentation. Good job. I think it's lost on no one how much work you put into that presentation. And I think we were in a discussion about whether or not it is reasonable to have strategy personnel within the organization or external to the organization. So my question is to remind us again what your role is. I know that the scope is temporary and that you were set up to do something and then the organization will no longer exist. I can't remember, you were in my discussion, what side of this bench you sat on when we had the discussion, but where are you now in terms of the personnel required? Because that was quite a bit of work that you undertook, and it does seem to need some dedicated resources and attention.
I think so. So yes, again, sort of my role's a bit peculiar. Strategy implementation is only one part of my role. I've got an operational role in terms of systems and data and operations processes and so on as well. So what I have experienced is that we have had contractors and temporary work in to help us with the strategy implementation. I find they can be very tick boxy. You've just asked us to do this, we're going to do this. So you have to be very clear that you want the whole business architecture. You don't want them just to develop a tool or whatever. And because we are still a startup and not all our systems and processes in terms of relationships with IT and the IT supplier and so on, the software supplier and so on, are fully formed, and our IT department has problem keeping his staff, and they've got contractors as well. I have found that the temporary resource does not have the commitment or the resilience to overcome the issues. I laterally started speaking to them about you're here, it's a startup, there's issues, you're X hundred a day, so we want you to bring your experience, we want you to help us develop, and that's the situation. And they just very, very few did, I'll be honest. I don't know, it felt like they wanted to come and get X hundred a day and just cruise through a standard routine. That is not this organization, and we needed people to really come in and help. So I am delighted now, even quite senior, business data owner I've just recruited and so on. They are now committed, and they like the problem solving, and they have the resilience to get over the issues and the commitment to stay. So there's always a place for short-term work, but I think you have to be careful. And if you're a bit of a missionary about your methods, you have to be ready to teach them and train them. I mean, I had a member of a top 5 consultancy leave, and they said, "Thanks very much, you've taught me a lot." And I thought, not sure that's the way round it should be. And they were significantly more than a few hundred a day.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shona. Last question. By the way, I've put the survey that Robin and I are doing in the chat. If appreciate if you can fill it in. But Evelina, last question, and then we just close the meeting. Thank you.
I will be super quick. Hi, Shona. Congratulations. I'm down here in London. And the question is, what's your ratio, or how do you change the ratio between change the business and run the business?
We don't change it. The run the business needs to happen every week. I'm just thinking about whether we should change it. We are fiddling with the governance, but generally, no. We let change the business get on with the work during the month, and then the impact group meets first, and then the transformation board meets at the end of the month. The checkpoint reports are done with their project boards, and then the impact group meets, and then the transformation board meets once a month. Yeah, okay, interesting question. I will consider that, whether we should be thinking about changing it.
I have more if I can reach out.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Thank you. I love that topic. I wrote about it in 2012, change and run the business. I think it's so important.
Ambidexterity, perhaps?
Ambidexterity, yeah, Evelina. It's so important. I love the topic. But
yes, exactly.
I want to thank you, Shona, for taking the time, for sharing your knowledge. We're going to be sharing your white paper, and there's so much inside. So, and we'll have maybe another discussion, because I see this topic has a lot of questions and points of view. I want to finish on time. Thank you, all of you, for being there, and have a good August, and we'll see each other in September.
Thanks, Antonio, to you and Robin for the support, and thanks to everyone for your kind words. Appreciate it. Questions?
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.